It gives young professionals the opportunity to interface with senior leaders and to work with others who will become future leaders in industry, military, government, and academics. We would like to thank Steampunk for sponsoring the West Theater this year and making this panel possible. Steampunk, previously known as SE Solutions, works for the Department of Defense, the Department of Homeland Security, federal civilian agencies, and justice and legislative agencies. Now it is my pleasure to introduce to you our sponsors for today's panel, Robert Pearson and Brad Cole. Robert Pearson is a dynamic and creative marketing professional with a diversified industry background and over 25 years of brand management and strategic marketing leadership experience. At Steampunk, he serves as a chief marketing officer and leads all of corporate communications. Brad Cole brings 25-plus years of experience leading technology business development and client-centered delivery within the public sector. As Steampunk's Chief Growth Officer, Brad leads the establishment and synchronization of Steampunk's corporate go-to-market business development model and with their culture and diversity delivery capabilities. So please join me in a warm AFCEA welcome for Robert Pearson and Brad Cole.
Good morning. I just wanted to give a little bit of a background around the brand. It's a little bit of a unique name. If anybody's familiar with the genre of steampunk, our company was built on the pretense at the most basic level of humans colliding with technology. Our foundation guiding principles in this process was four things. It has to be about people first, people that translates into culture, culture with communication, transparency, and clarity. And those three things by themselves are great, but it really has to brace for an impact with our federal government clients and the true end users of the services and technologies that they use.
Thanks, Rob. Just to say a few things, it was really interesting when this panel came to be, and the topic is really relevant to how we formed Steampunk. The Google's Project Aristotle, if anybody's familiar with that, is kind of one of the base tenets of the topic today. And the whole idea is really to work on establishing norms that foster innovation and collaboration and openness among teams. And I think we're going to hear some great things and comments and opinions today on that. And that's really what drove us to create Steampunk. It was to bring a team of very senior technologists who'd had success in government, but in a way that we could really break down some of the barriers we had felt we had in our prior companies and work very openly and collaboratively. And the word psychologically safe environment, if you've read the articles, you know that's a real thing. And we're excited today to sponsor the panel and hear more opinions on this topic. Thanks.
So now for the panel. Our moderator today is Brandon Lester. Brandon is the Young AFCEAN Advisory Council YAC Panel's committee co-chair and has helped facilitate this panel, bringing these members together. He also serves as the AFCEA Hawaii Board of Directors, on the AFCEA Hawaii Board of Directors. Brandon is the Vice President of Security Engineering at SRC Technologies and has spent over 10 years leading technical teams in enterprise cloud security, cybersecurity analytics, cross-domain solutions, and enabling coalition interoperability with partnering nations. Our panelists include Dr. Cayley Rice, a solutions architect in the Leidos Innovation Center with roles in business development, technical program execution, and management. Next to her is Joe Rohner, director of Booz Allen Hamilton's Strategic Innovation Group, an analytics team focused on delivering data science, artificial intelligence, and analytics solutions in the Pacific and for the Department of the Navy. Next is Mike Whelan. He is the DCMA Commercial Item Group West Technical Team Director located in Denver, Colorado. And then we have Stephanie Tharp. She is the Product Support Manager for NAVWAR's Tactical Networks Program Office and Government PM for the Canes Training Virtual Environment Contract. So please again join me in a warm AFCEA welcome as I turn the podium over to Brandon.
Thank you, Tina. Thank you to AFCEA International and to Steampunk for the opportunity to host the panel today. I'm really looking forward to getting into a number of topics with our panelists. So the focus today is identifying what it takes to build and sustain high-performing technical teams. Every organization strives to improve team performance, and today I think the topic really focuses on the baseline of what it takes to build those teams. So to kick off, we're going to discuss findings from a study done by Google. This Project Aristotle was a few years ago, and they analyzed over 180 teams over a 2-year period to determine which key factors help them identify the specific traits of successful teams. So I'm going to highlight those 5 traits now, and then we'll cover them throughout the panel. The 5 key factors are, 1, psychological safety. And that means that team members feel safe to be able to take risks and vulnerable in front of each other. The opportunity to say what you really need to say in a comfortable environment. 2, dependability. Team members get things done on time, but they also meet a high bar for excellence within that. 3, structure and clarity. So team members understand that they have clear roles, plans, and goals within their team. 4, meaning to the work. The work is personally important to the team members, and they feel like they're contributing to an important mission. And 5, impact of the team. Team members believe that their work matters, and it creates change. So with that as the background of where we're starting, I'd like to invite each panelist to start with a time that they were on a high-performing team and what that team meant to them. So I'd like to start with Cayley.
So I think that the key feeling of being on a high-performance team is really just wanting to go to work and work with that team. Everybody's got each other's backs, and you really feel like a cohesive unit rather than just an individual contributor.
Yeah, so I'll go a little tactical and talk about an actual experience that I had about 18 months ago. We were engaged in delivery of a new analytics capability. And looking at the factors from the Aristotle, we started with structure and clarity. But as this was a new capability that was emerging, the thing that really helped the team was the psychological safety, because we had to make mistakes quickly so we could learn from them. And the environment itself was great because we sourced so many new ideas very quickly. The other factor that really showed up in that team was dependability, because we got to the point where we were in the last week of delivery. We figured out a variable code that needed to be fixed, and we literally all stayed up together regardless of what our role was to make sure we crossed the finish line. So that teamwork and that cohesion was really great in that technical team environment.
Yeah, for me, joining DCMA Commercial Item Group, we were forming a brand new team and just starting out, and I would say just feeling empowered to bring innovative solutions and giving people the ability to take risks and get out of their comfort zone and bring these solutions to the table was very important. But also to footstomp Cayley's comment, just the ability, just feeling excited to go to work and it not feeling like work, I think helped spur innovation and get people out of their comfort zone.
Good morning. So the example that I will use is a recent team that I was able to lead over the past about year and a half. And this team, the tenets that we really started with were the meaning of work and the impact of work. We ran into an issue in the fleet where we had the consolidated afloat networks and enterprise services, which is essentially the internet on ships. From a training perspective, it is imperative that our folks are trained and are able to operate these systems. They're difficult to use and very large systems and important to the overall mission. We ran into an issue where we only had a hardware-centric solution that wasn't able to train all the software versions that were needed in the fleet. The training was slow to update. We weren't able to get enough students through, so it really highlighted the need to provide a solution that helps with the mission of the networks in the fleet. And because of that, we were able to, in a very short time frame, 1 year, switch the solution over to a software-centric solution, move from 2 sites to 8 sites, instead of 240 students per year, we could have 840 students per year, and really kind of unlimited possibilities moving forward. But based on that, the team felt a lot of, they definitely felt ownership. They felt a lot of work satisfaction as the tasking was extremely important. It is something that had never been done before, so it required a lot of creativity. And they were empowered to come up with a solution, not really dictated how, but just that it needed to be done.
Thank you all. Just adding a quick thought. I've been on good teams, maybe a couple of bad teams, some great teams, and framing it all together, I have always felt that the team is supposed to be able to be in an environment where you can focus on the mission. And if you consider the people, processes, and technology triad that we often talk about, the people part is certainly one of the harder ones to narrow down and focus on. It's easy to say the technology, we have to go buy this new tool, this new product. The technology doesn't mean much if the team is not actually working in a cohesive manner. So starting there is always the first step for me. So moving on to the next question, I'd like to ask the panelists, which key dynamic out of the 5 for a high-performing team has been the most important on teams that you've been on? I'll start with Joe.
So going back to the study, I'll take the easy answer and say they're all important. But if I had to choose one, I'll frame it that this is a technical team. So I think structure and clarity to me is the most important. We're dealing with staff and technologists who typically like to have a specific mission. They know what their job is and their role is, and they all like to know what their swim lanes are. And those swim lanes will merge and intersect throughout the project, but I think you have to start with structure and clarity. Otherwise, you have chaos and you don't have individual ownership.
For me, on my team, it's a lot of independent work from 13 different engineers, but there's also a certain sense of trying to come up with solutions for the greater good of DoD. And so it's trying to bring that vision to the individual casework and having everybody come together in a cohesive manner and saying the same thing, but also, trying to bring that vision of, why are we here? What is the importance of our job? And a combined vision to move forward, to bring solutions outside of the day-to-day individual casework.
For the teams that I work with, I would say the dynamic of psychological safety is really foundational to all of the other dynamics. In a way, some ways that we would attempt to create this would be open communication, non-attribution, early and often reporting any issues or challenges, and instead of focusing on who did what wrong or blame, focusing towards the solutions, and it got us to resolution and to product completion a lot faster by moving that way.
I thought somebody was sure to say what I was going to say. So on my teams, which have been primarily very low technology readiness level R&D programs, I've been really fortunate to have just amazing technical contributors who are all individually very high achievers. And some of the struggle with that is that there's often some conflict between them, but also that without that factor of dependability, everyone wants to take over and do it themselves. If you can't trust your coworker or your teammate or your employee or your boss, your lead, to actually get the work done, then everybody's trying to just do it themselves. And that contributes to a lot of very individual pieces, but not a cohesive unit. And it also means that you're not using people in their own roles as well as you possibly could. So I think dependability has been really the key that drives the other 4 factors. I agree, they're all relevant, but in our work, it's typically that dependability that really breeds the trust that gives you the psychological safety, that gives you the ability to kind of self-create the structure and clarity. In R&D, you have a little bit less clarity. And then usually these people come into the programs with the sense of meaning. Just doing the work is the meaning, right? Really highly technical people doing research, just getting an answer is kind of the motivation a lot of the time. So I found that it's dependability.
Thank you. So following up to that same set of topics, within the 5 factors, what do you guys think the key dynamics are that are the most difficult to achieve in that space? When you have one of them you're trying to get, but it's hard to tackle, how do you overcome that as well?
I think for me, so I guess within the government, DoD has essentially built a risk-averse culture. The FAR is huge, DFARS is huge, and we constantly are adding things to it. Just being on the government side, I think that's the biggest challenge, is trying to have people feel safe to make a decision and take a risk. It's incredibly challenging because then we have a bunch of rules to play by and sometimes contradictory. So it's trying to empower your people to take the risk despite this culture that's very prevalent within DoD.
For the teams that I work on, I think that structure and clarity has served to be a more difficult area than some of the others. A lot of times, if you're trying to create a team that is empowered, coming in right off the bat and telling them what to do seems a little counterproductive to that. But at the end of the day, I try to think of when I'm helping the team, form the strategy we're going to work with, that I'm maybe directing what we're doing, but in no way directing how, and leaving that up to each of the individuals and empowering them. And another way in which this is difficult is in the government, there is a lot of structure and clarity via regulations, rules, and when you're trying to empower a team to move quickly, some of the direction that we are going to be following is going to even be breaking what we typically use in the government. So I have found that to be difficult.
So I think that structure and clarity also for my teams has been one of the most challenging. And again, it's because they're so researchy, and you kind of know where you need to start. You need to start by understanding the problem really deeply, and you kind of know where you need to go at the very end. You want to have solved the problem, but somewhere in the middle, that miracle happens, like the Far Side cartoon. So it's not entirely clear what the whole program's going to look like. We also have some issues with structure because I work at a very large company, probably like most, certainly all of us up here, large companies or the government have a lot of structure, a lot of bureaucracy, but it's not necessarily the right structure to empower the team or to divide up responsibilities in the most efficient way. And so sometimes having that imposed structure runs counter to the effectiveness of the team.
So I'm going to agree with Mike and say I think psychological safety is the most difficult to achieve, especially in the sector that we work. I will say, though, I am hopeful based on some of the recent department moves, especially on the AI side, from Project Maven and the JIG. The message and the mantra really is fail fast, always learn. And so we can push forward in those areas. And so I think that the risk that we run in these is helping staff understand it's okay to get it wrong. You've now proven that doesn't work, so what's the next solution? And as a leader of those teams, I think it's really important that they set the tone by being infallible themselves. They don't always know the way, but they know the next step. And so how do we as a team kind of move in that direction and fail until we learn what the right path is?
Thank you. Moving more towards how do you form these teams and sustain a high-performing team, I wanted to go through and kind of build on all the topics you guys have talked about, especially hearing failing fast is critical. Very often we hear failure is not an option. I think in a mission capacity that's true. Leading up to that, failing often and quickly is very important. Otherwise we won't know how to succeed after that. So when you start to build a team, what are the keys to that? How do you build those high-performing teams? Let's start with you, Stephanie.
Sure. So I know that all the panelists will have good answers to this, so I won't go through every step, but the first step that I take when I'm on a new team or leading a new team is I like to meet with the entire team, or at least the team leads, depending on how big it is, and essentially just listen. What is it that every person on the team does? What are the accomplishments they've had? What are the issues and challenges that they have? And demonstrate to them, via listening, being engaged with questions, not offering my thought direction immediately. I think that really opens the gate to the psychological safety portion of forming the team.
So my notes that I wrote just said listen as well. That's just a critical component, and I think at Leidos, in my organization, we work very hard to listen before we form teams, so that if someone really doesn't want to be working on a specific project, we either find a way to find them a different project, or find a way to ensure that there is a path for them to get meaning out of the work that they're doing and possibly contribute to two things at once. I think that the other piece of that is not just listening to what people say, but also paying attention to what they do and what their skills really are, both specific technical skills, but also who's a really great presenter, who is a great writer, and how can you bring those sort of soft skills into their roles and put people in positions where they get to use their talents, their innate abilities to really shine.
Yeah, so I agree actually with both. What's interesting is like when it says how do you build a high-performing team, that to me almost assumes that you get to choose who your team is. We're not in grade school picking kickball teams, and usually you inherit a team, and you've got to figure out how you take the individuals with that domain expertise or that part of your organization, and how do you make them a cohesive bunch. So again, agreeing with what I've heard so far, it's really about picking up on EQ, understanding how each person works. What is their reward system? Where are their strengths? How do you bring the best out? And how do you deconflict where there are going to be natural areas of friction because of the members of that team?
I would say within my group, I guess I get to pick the kickball team a little bit. So we, within our group, and when we formed, we got to hire who we wanted to hire. And for us, when we're hiring people, it's really a lot more focused on attitude and aptitude than the skill set. So the skill set is certainly important. If it's an engineering coded position, they have to have an engineering degree. But I think it's a lot more important for us to find people that are driven, looking to make a difference, and are willing to take on a certain level of risk in making decisions.
Thank you.
I have one more thing to add, which is that at the outset, aligning the team. I think Stephanie talked about bringing the whole team together and talking to them. Just aligning them to that common goal and that common mission from the beginning is critical to getting people all working in alignment with each other.
Thank you. So you've now built the team. You have a project that is well underway, but you start getting challenges and there are hurdles in the way and people start stagnating. Maybe it's not as exciting as it used to be. How do you continue that high-performing level and sustain the team at that period of success? Let's start with Mike.
I think that you just described my team currently. So the commercial item group stood up in 2016, and we were able to bring in a whole lot of high-performing people and collect those good people in moving in a direction. And very much the challenge right now is trying to keep that momentum and try and find new innovative ideas that we're trying to bring to the DoD. And it's just trying to empower the good ideas and not ever saying no. Me as a leader, it's trying to figure out, I like that idea, trying to fine tune it, and it's my job to bring that forward to my boss and his boss and really trying to spur that innovation and continue on that path. And that's certainly a challenge within DCMA and DoD in general.
I think it's important to remember that the work doesn't end, even if it seems like we've hit a major success point. Do celebrate that. Make sure the team understands that was important, gets recognition, but then move forward into now what's the next thing that we can tackle. And as you're making new goals, make sure that there are metrics that are measurable and endpoints where you can say, yes, in fact, we have met this, and now what's the next thing, and let's keep going.
So I'm going to piggyback on your suggestion of just celebrating successes as you go. In a lot of situations, there is no necessarily concrete endpoint other than maybe when a contract ends. But it's really important to very publicly, I think, celebrate the successes that you have along the way and to make sure that the team understands how they fit into the bigger picture. The other thing is that as you mentioned, Brandon, the people start maybe getting a little bored with the situation. You know, if your team is all high performers and they're all growing, then they're not going to want to do exactly the same thing day in and day out for years on end. So I try to find new ways for them to grow, new roles for them to take on as we maybe grow and bring in more junior employees. The junior employees rise up and take on task leadership. There is kind of a natural rising of all tides, or rising tide, rising of all boats. So just collectively planning what the next steps are going to be, how they fit into that broader mission, but also making sure that everybody has an opportunity to take on new challenges and not necessarily stay in exactly the same role that they've been in.
So I'll try not to be too duplicative here because I agree with everything that's been said, but you need to realize that we're talking about sustainment. So where your team may have started is not where they are now, and the circumstances may have changed. So acknowledging that the environment has changed is extremely important. And then that also goes back to maybe where you started your team with what was your vision, what was the mission. Have you looked at that again, and have we updated that so we understand where we're headed going forward? And so I think looking backwards and looking forward are extremely important to sustaining teams.
Thank you all. On that note, I'd like to share, there's a book that I've read, The First 90 Days, and it speaks to a lot of those points where you're establishing exactly how you start the team, but I would almost challenge the first 90 days, then becomes the next 90 days, and then becomes the next 90 days. It gives you an opportunity to really continue to evaluate where you are, how you can improve those goals that you set out originally, and then continue to maximize that performance, and almost like a reset opportunity when you feel like you're starting to stagnate. Changing things up a little bit, I wanted to touch on within these technical teams, we often have very technical folks and a lot of high performers, but quite often you also integrate some folks that are not necessarily as technical. And I think the interaction between those folks within a team is absolutely critical to the success of the team as a whole. So I wanted to ask very pointedly, what value in a team do you guys see non-technical members bringing to that technical team? Let's start with Joe.
So I think it's just as important as the technical competence of the rest of the members. So at Booz Allen Hamilton, we are 106 years old, and our roots are in management consulting. That's where we started our journey. We are very much a technology company, and so when I'm interviewing an AI engineer or a machine learning specialist, one of the things that's super important is that I have to explain to them up front that although you are a technologist, you are a data scientist, you are all of these things, you're also a consultant before you're any of those things, because we are working across teams and with clients. And so stressing that point, we have roles, and I count myself in this bucket of, versus a data scientist, I prefer to call myself a data diplomat. I can understand the business side of the house, and then I can understand the technical side of the house, and I can bring the requirements together so that the technologists can understand where we're headed, and I can also fend off some of this right, wrong, they don't understand what we're doing type of mentality.
So on my team, we have engineers and price cost analysts as well as contracting officers. So my engineers are constantly working with non-technical types and trying to develop solutions. And our customers tend to be the contracting officers for various DoD agencies. And it's very important for my engineers to be on the same page. You might not agree, but at least understanding that price cost analyst perspective, that contracting officer perspective, is important because a great solution might not be achievable for various reasons. So yeah, we do that all the time on our team.
So I disagree with my team members. Non-technical people should never be allowed on technical teams. No, but in reality, I'm usually the least technical member or a lesser technical member on the teams that I'm involved in. And I definitely think there's a lot of value to be added by cross-functional teams, and it's a lot of the things you see with competency alignment that were a thing across NAVWAR, NAVCEA, and all the other agencies, isn't an effort to say that you get the most value with the most diversity, whether it be race, gender, age, technical background, and the projects that we work have an element of everything. So even if it is a technical solution, there are contracts required, there's legal required, there's sustainment required, and it's important to look at all of those in your teams.
So I'm going to give a couple really concrete examples. So the kinds of work that I do, I work primarily in electronic warfare, and so a lot of our programs are highly classified, and we literally wouldn't have our doors open if it weren't for security. Right? If our security personnel didn't show up, get the paperwork done, submitted in accordance with RMF and everything, all the I's have to be dotted and the T's crossed in exactly the right way, or we cannot do our jobs. So it's absolutely critical that we're able to work with security, particularly when you need to start crossing the boundaries between classified and unclassified to make sure that the work can get done in the right environment. So that's really valuable for our team. Another really concrete example, and though I am a technical person, my background is very technical, I actually lead microelectronics efforts, designing computer chips, and that is not my expertise. So in terms of the very specific teams that I'm leading now, I'm not the technical expert. And the value that I bring in that is really that most of our customers also don't sit around writing HDL for a living. That's not their goal. Their goal is to have a computer chip that will do what they need it to do. And so to be able to communicate between the technical, very deeply technical engineers who are writing every circuit in this chip, and our management, our customers, and especially our export attorneys who we need on board or will never even get the chip fabricated. So it really is a collective effort, and I think that the non-technical pieces of the team, though, especially in the technical R&D programs, which is typically what I run, the focus is the technical work, but that technical work would never happen, and it would certainly never actually have any impact or any extent beyond that 10-person team working in a SCIF, were it not for the rest of our community.
Thanks, Cayley. So I often hear folks talk about empowering a team, make sure everyone's engaged. I like to think of that as how do we maximize the potential of the team. And when you maximize individuals, as you mentioned, Cayley, it's not the same as necessarily maximizing the team. In one of these scenarios, within each of your high-performing teams, do you guys think of a time where you really had to focus on how it takes a little bit of extra effort to make sure the team itself is maximizing their potential? Can we start with Joe? This is a curveball. They didn't know this one was coming.
So, I guess I'll go back to kind of that, when did everything click, or what was the moment, kind of on how all of it came together. And I think I led with talking about that engagement we had about 18 months ago. And it was, we were hitting our heads against the wall on why is this solution not working. And everyone was taking their own approach at it. We're sitting in a corner room with 5 laptops. Some profanities may have been in the room or not. And the aha moment came when someone came upon it and we kind of all looked at it. And it made sense, and all of a sudden you could feel like the engine starting back up. Everything was going in the right direction. We got our sprint back, and we were kind of running at full pace at that point until 4 a.m. But it was that moment, it was that camaraderie. There's something about being in the trenches together that really kind of helps that team propel forward.
Mike, you want to jump on the aha moment of when you knew that team was clicking on all cylinders?
Yeah, I think my brain immediately went to the other supervisors that I work with, and they're leading, more stovepipe teams. We have another engineer that's leading an engineering team. We have a couple of supervisors leading price cost analyst teams, and we frequently have quarterly meetings as a group, since we very much use price cost analysts to do our job on the engineering side. The aha moment was, the late nights, and it doesn't feel like work. We're all running in the same direction, coming up with ideas on how to better lead our teams individually, but also coming together for the greater good. And I think that for me was the aha moment. I'm putting in crazy hours, but it does not feel like work. I'm excited to get up and do it all over again. So that for me sealed the deal.
So I think for me, even though I have a number of contracts and projects, we also have, I have a team of about 74 people. And their folks, when I came on board about 3 years ago to this project, they had all been working 20 years or more in their particular areas, and some on the same set of systems. So it was coming in and trying to establish a team that was high-performing, innovative. I definitely was breaking some of the methods that had been used previously. So I meet with them twice yearly, and we always do status, issues, and then areas for innovation. And at first those were extremely limited, but I think when I could really see probably about the 3rd meeting that I had with them, I started getting some recommendations that were actually beyond the scope of what I thought was possible. And that's when I could really tell the team had really bought into that methodology.
So I think on my current team, the aha moment was when I had all of the team leads kind of sitting in the conference room talking about things, and these are all people we've mostly worked together for about a decade, so it's a long-standing history with frankly a lot of baggage that comes with that. We've been on a lot of teams together where there's been a lot of conflict, and when I noticed each lead asking the other ones what they thought. Everybody's got their own expertise that they bring to this, and so when people who are typically very contentious instead are saying, oh, well, on this thing Mike's really the expert, what do you think? On this thing Cayley's really the expert, what do you think? That really, particularly from some of these personalities for whom that doesn't seem natural, that really brought that home.
Thank you. I really like all the answers, understanding that once you see the team is performing, you feel like you're ready to go higher, go further. From teams that I've experienced, there are folks that come to work and they're there to work, but then you realize the really successful teams are there to work together. They want to work with each other. They want to keep pushing forward. It's not a give me a status and we'll check back a week from now. It's I want to solve this problem. So understanding that we're here in an environment that really works within the government, understanding that the teams that each of you have built and have participated in have seen high performing opportunities. What would you recommend government organizations can do to build more high performing teams? Because I've seen many of them in pockets. How do we consistently continue to build those teams within government across the board? Let's start with Stephanie.
Sure. So I think a lot of what we see, I know most of the folks folks here work with the government or for the government in some way, but what we think of is if we're running into situations where we need something and you ask why not, and the reason is because someone said no, because bureaucracy, because there's a policy, because it's not the way that we do it. I think those are the things we really need to tackle individually and working with our teams to say we won't accept that for an answer. Push further, and if something makes sense and is the right thing, really track to that and encourage our teams to track towards that as well.
Yeah, I agree. I also think I don't know isn't a great answer to why not, which I think we feel a lot, just because so many of the decisions happen somewhere, and it's very nebulous. I think that the other thing, besides that sort of clarity, I guess, of purpose, is this is not something I think any of us can probably fix, but when funding gets disrupted by the government, I work for a contractor. I know that the same problems happen on the government side when there are government shutdowns. That's incredibly demoralizing. But that stops. It breaks up the work. It breaks up the momentum. It means that we lose people off of our teams. We have to bring new people in when we start back up again. And it just creates such a precariousness that is counter to all of those factors that Google found. Psychological safety is hard when you're not sure if you're going to have a job next month because the Congress might not pass a budget. Impact. Is this thing ever going to transition, or is it just going to get dropped because of some political or funding thing somewhere? So those kinds of things I think are really impacted by the precariousness that happens in our funding plans and profiles.
So first off, acknowledging again that we're in that government or Department of Defense space. One of the things that's really great about this environment is the mission itself. So that mission really can drive teams, but those missions sometimes don't allow for creativity. And we need to acknowledge that. So I think what the government can and should do is where it can create space for failures, create space to think about things differently, to show a different operating model. But I just will acknowledge that there are areas in certain missions where that just isn't possible. So we've got to find those moments and those aspects within the organization where that can happen.
So I brought up hiring earlier, and hiring for aptitude and attitude over necessarily looking for one specific skill set. And this is an area that's incredibly challenging for where I work within DCMA. And one thing that we've looked into is, hey, we have certain rules and regulations on how to hire people, but how can we still follow the rules, but maybe don't do how we've always done it? And it's 1 through 6, and it's all the same questions, and really trying to modify those questions to find the people that are willing to think outside the box, willing to take risks, and those are the people that we really need in order to disrupt this cultural norm within DoD. So I would say, from a hiring perspective, just looking for ways to follow the rules still, but think a little out of the box to get the right people in.
Thank you. I wanted to take a moment and ask anyone that has a question from the audience, please get ready to come up and we'll jump into those in just a minute. I wanted to start by following on to that government question. Having been across teams within intelligence community that I've experienced and beyond there, do you see unique problems in each of your respective customers and client spaces, or do you think of them as a whole of government issues that we have to just continue to work against and start to tackle?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, there are generic, or there's cross-organization challenges that are going to be there, but every team and every engagement and every mission is also going to be unique. So I'm going to answer it both ways.
Fair enough.
So I will say that some of the challenges that you brought up, with my customer base, which is mostly resource focused, we actually have a lot more space and freedom to fail fast. So I think that there are pockets, and it is being recognized in some spaces that is the approach that we need to take in order to kind of pursue that really cutting edge out in the future research.
So we work with a ton of different customers, and they all have different needs. So that's a challenge, and also why we want to find people that can adapt to the environment and push the limit a little bit, and meet the customer's needs certainly. But let's have a conversation and figure out how we can do things better for the DoD.
And for my particular area, going back to the example that I gave with the training virtual environment, I would say there are definitely some specific barriers in that a lot of government cloud work is still, we're essentially in the Oregon Trail portion of that work where there's a lot of territory that has not been covered before, and a lot of finding that when we come up with a new idea, an idea that makes sense, an idea that saves money, the answer is no, because it hasn't been done before, because we don't exactly know how to do it. One specific example is our environment scales up and scales down, so each time a student logs in, 33 to 38 servers are built for them. Their own network is built per individual. And it's a great solution. It saves cloud hosting dollars, but it's new to the cloud broker, and it's new for government. And we were held up months with the folks we had to go through said they couldn't give us when we finally got down to why it wasn't moving, they couldn't give us a quote on the cost because they didn't know how the scaling up and scaling down would work. And of course we can solve that, but it's just a matter of kind of when something is new and something is scary, a lot of times if you don't continue to push, it just stops.
I'll share a quick story. I had some experience on a team where we started off from scratch a new software development project, and the project lead let us exist in a bubble and kind of hide in the back for a little while. And it really takes a burden off of the team to not have to continually demonstrate value. Right? Where's my money going? How is that being used today? And at the end of that year, at the end of that 2-year period, we had a killer product to go demonstrate. So understanding within the government and government leaders knowing, hey, I have to give this team time to succeed before we go and demand results is a big takeaway that I've seen. And it really helps. You don't see it as often because there's always, what have you done for me lately, and how do we go forward from here? But everyone has a chance to build the team and continue to provide success from there. So I'd like to go ahead and take some questions from the audience. And this mic up front should be live.
Morning.
Morning.
So it's probably voice activated. So I'm Linda Newton. I'm from the AFCEA Hawaii chapter and work with Brandon. So what do you do when you have a team member that isn't high performing and is starting to affect both the team and the delivery of whatever product or service that you're working on?
That's a good question. Luckily, I haven't had to face that problem too much, but I would say, the high-performing people are looking at how you handle that low performer and how you're, dealing with it, and that could turn into a very toxic situation if it's not handled appropriately. So, I guess from my end, within the DoD, we have, individual performance plans and certain things that are, those people are supposed to achieve. I would say I would handle it with, a lot of conversation up front before formalizing anything and really trying to challenge and figure out what is the driving force behind, the lack of drive, if you will. I would just say that it's incredibly important to jump on those and nip them quickly.
From my perspective, I'd say I know it's been said many times before, but there aren't very many people that come to work wanting to do a bad job. So if somebody is, a lot of times there is a root cause to what's going on with an individual. And so I like to take time to try to figure that out, and I think of each of those, in an instance where that's been the case, as being an opportunity to get more performance out of the team. I know I don't always hear about this in terms of business, but there's the book 5 Love Languages. Of course, it applies to relationships, but it also points out the fact that everybody is motivated in different ways. And I think it's important to work with your individual team members when you're experiencing that and see if there is some way you can essentially bring them into the fold, because demonstrating to the rest of your team that you simply cut people when they're not working also does not foster the psychological safety aspect of what we're talking about.
Yeah, so very similar to what Stephanie said, and not to repeat too much, you've got to assess why and see what you can do to remedy the situation. And then another book, Good to Great, you have to acknowledge when it's time to get the person off the bus. But you have to make sure as a leader that you've empowered that individual and that team to be successful, and then be willing to make the decision so that you can move forward as a team if needed.
I don't really have anything else to add.
Thank you so much. I just heard about, when it's time to get somebody off the bus. My question was going to be, how do you know, and what kind of selection criteria do you use to make sure you got near perfect fit for those seats on the bus?
I guess I'll start. So you're never going to get a team perfect, and you also have to look. So also related to maybe the labor market right now as well. So we have an amazing labor market at the moment, meaning it's really hard to find really good talent. So as a leader, you have to make sure that you're setting the criteria for what the environment should be. You're bringing the most qualified people on to your team to get them there. But you have to be willing to grow and mold people through the process. But then at some point, you just realize that it's not going to get there.
So the selection criteria is tempered by a hot job market where you can't necessarily drill down to that near perfect fit.
I guess yes, and I want to be careful how I say that because of the missions that we operate. I'm not saying that we should accept subpar individuals, but if we continue to look for near perfect, our teams would never get off the ground, at least in my opinion.
So in a lot of the research and studies that have been done in terms of hiring, the only consistency I've seen in that, and I do hire, so I do pay attention, is that we all do it wrong, and there is no way to know. Interviewing people doesn't tell you whether they're going to be any good on your team. It doesn't tell you whether they're good technically. Looking at resumes, I think we all probably realize that's not the all and end all. There's not a great way to do it. I think it's a lot more important to figure out what is going to help someone fit rather than whether they are a good fit. Because in trying to build an inclusive team with a diversity of thought and a diversity of opinions and building that psychological safety component, you need people who are willing to listen to each other and come with some expertise or ability to solve problems. And I find that ability to solve problems and listen is probably more important than anything else. And I think you might be able to gauge that in some conversations or in some resumes.
Thank you. That sounded like enthusiasm.
I'm enthusiastic about hiring smart people who know how to solve problems. Yeah. So if anybody is smart and knows how to solve problems, let me know.
And I heard that from Mike earlier, right? Attitude and aptitude is a huge factor there.
Yeah.
Thank you guys so much for this panel. I've gotten a lot out of it as far as managing teams. I do a lot with AFCEA, and then in my personal or in my professional career, managing a lot of teams, so I really appreciated all the insights. The question that I have for you is a little bit different and a little bit more tactical. Do you see any value, and if you have any experience with it, can you expand on it, using personality assessment tools when you're putting together a team and when you're maintaining a team? So Myers-Briggs, StrengthsFinder, DISC, any of those?
I'll start. So I recently learned that Myers-Briggs is highly inconsistent. So not only is it hard to necessarily get the same personality score over and over, but it is always a tool to start a conversation. It should never be the end-all, be-all of how people interact. It helps you get there. And I think DISC does the same, gives you opportunities. Okay, if I am a D and I'm talking to an I, how do I interact there? It's a way to fuel that concept, but it really needs to focus on how to get people to connect. I think, like Stephanie said, there's lots of opportunities. Love languages is another one where however we as people and humans are able to connect more and build those teams, it really, the tools that help get you there is beneficial. If you use it more than that and you're not focused on connecting with others, then it becomes a problem.
I'll go a step farther and say that I've heard stories about companies using those things to make hiring and promotion and firing decisions, and I think that is just, frankly, bordering on unethical for a lot of the same reasons. They're not scientific. I personally have very little faith in them. I have participated in many of them. I just finished some leadership training with DISC, and I've done Myers-Briggs, and I have an ongoing argument with my chief architect, actually, where he puts a lot of stock in it and I don't, and it's a point of contention. I think I'm just really going to agree that there's a value in recognizing that other people think differently than you, but to try to put a label on it and say that somebody does it in a particular way every time or is going to interact in the same way every time, I think is probably going way too far.
I think Joe said it earlier, and just knowing your people, having conversations with your people, this is well after the hiring process, but knowing what they're good at and where their certain skill sets fit makes a whole lot of sense.
And for me, I would say we don't use those assessment tools, and I agree with everybody on the inconsistency, and especially on when you're bringing team members on. There's definitely not a study that shows the most effective way to do it. Ultimately, we are operating with founded rationality and can only, we think we know a lot, but in functionality it can often turn out differently. But one thing I do try to do on my teams is make sure that we have diversity. And I mean, that can manifest in a lot of ways. But if I'm interviewing someone and they're not like me for any number of reasons, I am attracted to that in people that I want to bring on the team because I know I'm going to get a different perspective. If we're just talking to a lot of me's, we're going to be really limited in the solutions we get.
Thank you. So we just have about 2 minutes left. I want to do a quick recap of some of the great points that I've heard and then hand it back to Tina. So throughout, I took notes. I got this tip from watching Linda at a panel a couple years ago. So from everything that I've heard, psychological safety is critical to make those mistakes quickly. You have to be able to be in a team and feel a part of that team to be able to move forward quickly. Structure and clarity is important when technologists are involved. They want to know what their role is. They don't want ambiguity there. Those same technical contributors that have really high value and can contribute individually at a high level don't necessarily build a cohesive team. You have to work on that. Within the Department of Defense area, we need to strive to empower people to make better decisions or to make decisions because we are often in a risk-averse environment. Meeting with the team when you start or meeting with the team consistently is very important, but not just have a meeting. It's listen to them. Listen to what they're saying because it lets you pay attention to their challenges, the strengths they have, and you can put people in position to succeed after that. And it's easier said than done, I know. Finally, celebrating success and moving forward from that success to tackle new challenges is how you continue driving forward. And lastly, I think with the question from the audience about what happens when you don't necessarily have a great fit, and Stephanie's point, people do not want to come to work and do a bad job. And as a leader, it is our job to help them find ways to improve. So on behalf of myself, Young AFCEA, and AFCEA International, I'd like to say thank you to all the panelists and hand it back to Tina.
Yeah, please join me in a round of applause for our panelists. Thank you. And thank you, Brandon, for pulling this panel together. I love the way you summarized it. Thank you. That was a good trick you learned from Linda. And thank you all very much for attending this panel today. I have one announcement that I want to make going forward. If you look in your program, on Tuesday afternoon, it lists the Women's Appreciation event at 4:45 to 6:30. That's actually been changed. We were fortunate enough to actually get it in the Hall A starting at 3:15. So General Maylock, U.S. Marine Corps, is going to be the guest speaker. Then we're going to give some awards to some outstanding women in AFCEA, and then there'll be a reception. It's not for women only. Men are invited. You want to hear General Maylock speak, but you have to make the changes in your brochure here. It's at 3:15 in Hall A tomorrow. So again, with that, we're going to release the group. Thank you all so much. Enjoy the rest of the day, and let's give one more round of applause to Brandon and the panelists. Thank you.